David thought he understood what marriage meant when he said "I do" to Sarah in October 2022. At 32, he believed their relationship was built on honesty, mutual support, and shared dreams for the future. They'd been together since 2018, weathered the challenges of moving in together, and celebrated their engagement with hope for a lifetime partnership. But sometimes the person sleeping next to you carries secrets so devastating that they can rewrite your entire understanding of love, trust, and reality. Their story began like so many modern relationships. Two people finding each other and building a life together step by step. They'd moved in together in August 2020, during the height of the pandemic, proving their commitment could survive even global uncertainty. Their engagement in August 2021 felt like a natural progression, and their wedding in October 2022 was the culmination of years of partnership. But marriage, as David would learn, was when the real tests began. About a year into their wedding vows, cracks started appearing in what had seemed like a solid foundation. The distance between them grew subtly at first. Less communication, fewer intimate moments, a sense that they were living parallel lives rather than sharing one.
Sarah's job became increasingly demanding, consuming her life in ways that seemed unsustainable. She was working brutal hours, starting at 6 a.m. and not stopping until 10 p.m., day after day, week after week. The schedule was relentless and left virtually no time for their relationship. She also traveled monthly to corporate headquarters out of state, adding even more strain to their connection.
What hurt David most was the selective nature of Sarah's energy allocation. While she claimed to have no time for him or their marriage, she somehow found energy for her friends. The message was clear, even if unspoken. Her husband wasn't a priority. Their sexual intimacy, once a source of connection and joy, began deteriorating under the weight of her alleged exhaustion and stress. David, ever the supportive husband, blamed external factors. He convinced himself that Sarah's demanding job and toxic work environment were the culprits. It seemed logical. Anyone would struggle under such pressure. He told himself that once the work situation improved, their marriage would return to its former happiness. Have you ever made excuses for a partner's behavior that you later realized were covering up something much worse? Share your experience in the comments. In May 2024, Sarah finally left her demanding job, recognizing that it had become unbearable. David felt vindicated in his patience and optimism. She had stuck with the toxic situation far longer than he thought wise, but he believed that better late than never was the right attitude. Now, finally, they could reconnect and rebuild their marriage. David was nothing if not supportive during this transition. He encouraged Sarah to take as much time as she needed to recover from her previous job before jumping into something new. He wanted her to heal, to rediscover herself, to return to being the woman he'd fallen in love with and married. The international vacation they took together seemed to confirm David's hopes. For a month, they traveled the world, reconnected, and rediscovered their intimacy. David felt like he had his wife back, like their marriage was returning to its original strength. The distance and coldness of the previous months seemed like a bad dream they were finally waking up from. But the improvement was temporary. When they returned from their dream vacation, reality set in with crushing force. David's own job became unbearable, creating stress that mirrored what Sarah had experienced. Meanwhile, Sarah remained unemployed, struggling with depression about her career prospects and uncertain about her professional future. They found themselves caught in separate worlds of stress and uncertainty. Sarah was seeing a therapist regularly, working through issues that she kept private from David. While he respected her need for individual therapy, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being left unsaid between them. The breaking point came in October 2024, during what should have been a routine weekend. Sarah was acting differently. distant, troubled, carrying some invisible burden that David couldn't identify. When he pressed her gently to open up, her response shattered his world. She wanted a divorce. What's the most shocking thing a partner has ever told you out of nowhere? How did you handle the emotional whiplash? David was devastated. How had they gone from reconnecting on their international vacation to discussing separation? The whiplash was emotional and confusing, leaving him grasping for explanations that made sense of their relationship's trajectory. Despite his previous resistance to couples therapy, a decision he now recognized as a mistake, David was willing to try anything to save their marriage. They began intensive counseling immediately, diving deep into 8 months of relationship analysis and personal growth work. The therapy process was revealing and seemingly productive. David worked hard on improving his emotional availability, learning to support Sarah in ways he hadn't understood before. They uncovered issues that both partners needed to address, and David threw himself into becoming a better husband with the dedication of someone fighting for his most precious relationship. The results seemed miraculous. They felt connected again, started taking weekend getaways to rebuild their romantic bond, and their sexual intimacy improved significantly. David believed they were not just saving their marriage, but making it stronger than it had ever been. The therapy had worked, the crisis had passed, and they were building a better future together. Yet something still felt incomplete. Sarah seemed happy about their relationship's progress, but remained troubled about herself. She carried a heaviness that David couldn't understand or address. No matter how much their marriage improved, she seemed burdened by some internal struggle that therapy wasn't resolving. This morning, David finally learned why. Sarah asked to speak with him before he left for the gym, an unusual request that immediately put him on alert. But therapy had taught him not to avoid difficult conversations, so he asked her to be direct about whatever was troubling her. What Sarah revealed would recontextualize their entire relationship and make David question everything he thought he knew about their marriage. She had been having an affair with her boss, a 48-year-old man in a position of power over her for over 2 years, from March 2022 until she left her job in May 2024. The timeline was staggering in its cruelty. The affair had begun before their marriage and continued through their wedding, their first anniversary, the period of marital difficulties, their international vacation, and even into their couples therapy. While David was working to become a better husband, Sarah was maintaining a secret relationship that made a mockery of everything they were building together. The revelation cast her former boss in a sinister light. A 48-year-old man pursuing a subordinate employee who was young enough to be significantly impacted by the power differential suggested predatory behavior. Sauer mentioned that he had likely moved on to his next victim, indicating a pattern of workplace sexual exploitation that went far beyond their situation. David's immediate response was raw and visceral. Hours of crying, screaming, and physically hitting walls reflected the complete breakdown of his emotional defenses. The man who had been patient, supportive, and committed to growth was suddenly confronted with the reality that his efforts had been built on lies. Have you ever felt completely gaslit by someone you loved? How did you recognize what was really happening? He asked Sarah to stay with her parents for the week, needing space to process this devastating revelation. As an immigrant without family nearby, David faced this crisis in relative isolation. They owned their house together, had no children, but shared a dog, practical considerations that would complicate any decision about their future. The most painful realization was how everything now made sense. Small details and incidents that had puzzled David over the years suddenly had clear explanations. The long hours,
the monthly trips to headquarters, the selective exhaustion that left no energy for him but somehow recharged around friends. The stress that seemed disproportionate to work demands. All of it now had a devastating clarity. David felt gaslit by the entire couple's therapy process. Month after month, he had focused on his own shortcomings and areas for improvement, while Sarah sat beside him, secretly maintaining an affair that violated every principle they were supposedly working to rebuild. The therapy that had felt so productive was actually an elaborate performance hiding the real source of their marital problems.
The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. David had been nothing but supportive throughout their relationship, or so he believed. While acknowledging his own areas for growth, he had remained committed to their marriage even during its most difficult periods. Meanwhile, Sarah had been living a double life that made his efforts seem foolish in retrospect.
Yet David's feelings remained contradictory and confusing. Despite his fury and devastation, he still loved Sarah and wanted to rebuild their life together. This internal conflict between justified anger and persistent love represents one of the most difficult aspects of affair recovery for betrayed spouses. Professional counselors often note that affairs create trauma similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, and David was experiencing classic symptoms. The betrayal was so complete and long-term that it challenged his basic ability to trust his own perceptions and judgments about relationships. The workplace context of Sarah's affair added additional layers of complexity and violation. Boss-subordinate affairs involve inherent power imbalances that can constitute workplace harassment or abuse. Sarah's revelation that her former boss had moved on to another subordinate suggested a pattern of predatory behavior that had victimized multiple women. The question that would haunt David going forward was whether this betrayal would continue to damage their relationship indefinitely. Even if he chose forgiveness and they worked toward reconciliation, could he ever fully trust her again? Would the knowledge of her 2-year deception poison every future moment of happiness between them?
Recovery experts emphasize that healing from long-term affairs requires complete honesty, genuine remorse from the unfaithful partner, and often years of intensive therapy. The fact that Sarah had voluntarily confessed rather than being discovered suggested potential for genuine remorse, but her participation in couples therapy while maintaining the affair complicated any assessment of her trustworthiness.
David's immigrant status added another dimension to his crisis. Without extended family nearby for support, he faced this devastating revelation with limited local resources. The house they owned together, their shared dog, and the practical realities of disentangling a marriage would complicate any decision he made about their future. The timeline of their relationship, 6 years together, including 2 years of marriage, represented a significant portion of David's adult life. The revelation that much of this time had been built on deception forced him to question not just their future, but his understanding of their entire shared history. How do you rebuild trust after a betrayal this extensive? Is it even possible? Or should some lines never be crossed?
Research on affair recovery suggests that relationships can survive infidelity, but success requires several key factors: complete cessation of the affair, full disclosure of all relevant information, genuine remorse and empathy from the unfaithful partner, and willingness from both parties to engage in intensive therapy in rebuilding work. Sarah's confession, while devastating, represented a potentially positive step in meeting some of these requirements. However, the length of the affair, its overlap with their marriage, and her ability to maintain it while participating in couples therapy raised serious questions about her capacity for the honesty and vulnerability that recovery would require. The power dynamic in Sarah's affair also raised questions about her agency and responsibility. While workplace harassment or coercion doesn't excuse betrayal of marital vows, it might provide context that could influence David's decision-making process. Understanding whether Sarah was a victim of workplace predation or a willing participant in mutual betrayal would be crucial for any path forward.
David's support throughout their relationship, his patience during her demanding job, his encouragement during her career transition, his commitment to couples therapy despite his initial resistance, demonstrated the kind of character that might be capable of navigating affair recovery. But good character doesn't make someone immune to justified anger or ongoing trauma from betrayal. The coming days and weeks would test David's capacity for processing complex emotions while making life-altering decisions. Should he pursue divorce proceedings to protect himself from further betrayal? Should he give Sarah an opportunity to prove her commitment to transparency and change? Or should he take time to process his own trauma before making any permanent decisions?
Professional guidance would be essential for David's healing, regardless of whether their marriage survived. Individual therapy could help him process the trauma of betrayal, understand his own needs and boundaries, and develop strategies for moving forward with or without Sarah.
The practical realities of their shared life, the house, the dog, the financial entanglement of marriage, would need to be addressed regardless of their ultimate decision. But David's immediate priority had to be his own emotional and psychological well-being after experiencing such a complete violation of trust.
Sarah's next actions would be crucial in determining whether their marriage could survive this crisis. Would she demonstrate genuine remorse and commit to complete transparency? Would she be willing to do the intensive work required for rebuilding trust? Or would additional revelations emerge that would make reconciliation impossible?
David's story serves as a reminder that affairs don't just destroy marriages. They attack the foundation of reality that betrayed spouses have built their lives upon. The recovery process, if pursued, would require rebuilding not just their relationship, but David's basic ability to trust his own perceptions and judgments.
The question, "Where do I go from here?" that David posed, reflects the overwhelming nature of his situation. The answer would depend on his own values, his assessment of Sarah's genuine remorse and commitment to change, and his ability to envision a future where the betrayal doesn't poison every moment of potential happiness.
David's journey forward, whatever path he chooses, will test every aspect of his character and resilience. His story reminds us that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome betrayal, but sometimes it might be the foundation for rebuilding something stronger and more authentic than what was lost.